You're listening to From Stillness, an audiobook for a mind in need of quiet. There's a kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep can touch. Not physical fatigue, not even mental strain, but something deeper. A soul-level exhaustion. The kind that doesn't announce itself with drama, but arrives quietly, like fog. You're still functioning, still replying to messages, still showing up. But something in you has gone quiet. The lights are on, but no one's home. Burnout isn't about being weak. It's about being overextended for too long, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You start to forget what it feels like to be well. Joy becomes a memory. Rest becomes a concept. Your mind runs loops while your body aches with stillness. And even when you try to stop, you feel guilty for not doing more. We often mistake this state for laziness or poor time management. But it's not a problem of effort. It's a signal. A blinking red light from within, whispering that you've been carrying too much for too long, with too little care in return. This isn't a call to push harder. It's a moment to pause. To recognize that burnout isn't a badge of honor or a phase to power through. It's a threshold. And when you reach it, the most courageous thing you can do isn't to keep going. It's to slow down, to listen, to finally come home to yourself. There's a strange kind of illusion many of us fall into, the belief that as long as we're being productive, we must be okay. We convince ourselves that motion equals progress, that full calendars mean full lives. But beneath the surface, something quieter stirs. A tension we don't talk about, a panic we dress up as purpose. You tell yourself you're just busy, that the exhaustion is normal, that one more coffee, one more checklist, one more late night will keep things from falling apart. But deep down, you're not thriving, you're managing, you're not creating, you're coping, strategically, efficiently, invisibly. Sometimes productivity becomes a mask we wear to avoid discomfort. Because if you stay in motion, maybe you won't have to feel the stillness. Maybe you won't have to admit how tired you really are. But eventually, the mask slips. The list loses its meaning. And you're left wondering why your days feel so full, yet your heart feels so empty. This is the quiet cost of overfunctioning, when the drive to appear composed is greater than the willingness to be honest. When we perform stability instead of cultivating it. When we survive by doing, because we're too afraid to simply be. The truth is, coping through performance isn't resilience, it's delay. And sometimes, the strongest move you can make isn't to keep going, it's to admit you're overwhelmed. Not as a failure, but as the first, brave step toward being whole again. There comes a point where something inside you quietly gives out. Not in a dramatic collapse, not in a way others would even notice, but in the soft unraveling that only you can feel. You open your laptop and stare through the screen. You scroll through messages but feel too tired to reply. You sit down to rest, and the silence feels heavier than noise. This is the moment when survival mode stops being sustainable. You've been holding it together for too long, meeting deadlines, saying yes, smiling politely, carrying the weight of just one more thing. But survival mode was never meant to be permanent. It's a short-term response, not a way of life. And yet so many of us live there indefinitely, afraid that if we stop, everything will fall apart. The breakdown doesn't always look like breaking. Sometimes it looks like apathy. Sometimes it's a long sigh you didn't notice. Sometimes it's not recognizing yourself in the mirror. What's terrifying isn't the collapse, it's the emptiness that follows. But here's the quiet truth. Falling apart isn't failure. It's feedback. It's your body's way of saying, I can't keep going like this. And listening to that message isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Because healing doesn't begin when you've reached the bottom. It begins the moment you stop pretending you're fine. And maybe, just maybe, what you need right now isn't to push forward, but to finally allow yourself to pause. When things fall apart, our instinct is often to fix. We search for control, for clarity, for something we can organize. And so, in the midst of burnout, many of us do something unexpected. We double down on structure. We make color-coded to-do lists. We build elaborate dashboards. We download the latest productivity apps and convince ourselves that if we can just get it all in order, the exhaustion will disappear. But here's the quiet trap. You can't out-organize emotional depletion. You can't heal your nervous system with another digital calendar. Structure is useful, yes, but when it becomes a shield against your feelings, it quietly turns into another form of avoidance. It's easy to fall into this clown phase, dressing up your crisis in aesthetics, mistaking a system for safety, believing that if you look functional, you must be okay. But healing doesn't come from performing stability. It comes from acknowledging the mess and being willing to sit with it, unfiltered. Rest isn't a reward for productivity. It's not something you earn by checking boxes. It's a biological necessity, a human right. And the moment you stop trying to optimize your way out of burnout is often the moment true recovery begins. Because beneath the dashboards and routines, there's a softer truth you've been avoiding. You are not a machine. You are a human, beautifully imperfect, deeply feeling, and long overdue for permission to simply exist, even without a plan. Change doesn't always arrive as a breakthrough. Sometimes it shows up as quiet resignation, a moment where even your coping strategies, the ones you've clung to, refined, relied on, stop working. You sit down to make another list, but the pen feels too heavy. You open your favorite app, but feel nothing. You try to push forward, but your body whispers, "Not today." That's the shift. When exhaustion no longer hides behind productivity. When your inner system says, "Enough," and means it. This isn't collapse, it's clarity. The recognition that the way you've been living is no longer sustainable, and perhaps never truly was. That the systems you built weren't support structures, but survival mechanisms. That what once helped you hold everything together is now the very thing pulling you apart. And in that moment, something soft begins to surface. Not a grand revelation, not a 5-step plan. Just a quiet question: what if I stopped running? Real change doesn't always begin with motivation. Sometimes it begins with stillness. With the courage to admit that what you need isn't another push, it's a pause. And maybe the bravest shift of all is choosing to rebuild your life, not around expectations, but around energy, around truth, around who you are when the noise finally fades. Because when burnout becomes louder than your distractions, you no longer need more hacks, you need healing. Before the world begins to ask anything of you, give something to yourself, a boundary. Most people start their day with a to-do list. But when you're healing from burnout, sometimes the more powerful place to begin is with a not-to-do list. A quiet, intentional decision about what you won't allow to shape your energy today. This is the morning nope list. It isn't cynical, it's not avoidance. It's self-respect written in small, practical refusals. No, I will not explain myself to people who have already made up their minds. No, I won't check emails before I've checked in with myself. No, I won't compare my slow morning to someone else's highlight reel. These aren't rules, they're reminders. That peace is something you protect, not something you stumble into. That clarity isn't found by doing more, but by filtering out what drains you before the day even begins. And most importantly, that you are allowed to begin softly. Not with pressure, but with presence. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do at the start of the day is choose what doesn't deserve your energy. And in that choice, you quietly reclaim your morning, not as a performance, but as a place to return to yourself. There's a moment each day that often slips through our fingers, the quiet space where we could simply be, but instead rush to do. We tell ourselves that stillness must be earned, that rest must be justified. And so we fill the silence with noise, the gaps with screens, the weariness with guilt. But healing begins when we reclaim that space, intentionally. Enter the sacred hour of stillness. 1 hour. No productivity, no expectations. Just permission to exist, gently. You don't need to meditate. You don't need a plan. You can lie on the floor. You can sip tea in silence. You can stare at the ceiling and let your thoughts soften around the edges. This hour isn't a waste of time, it's restoration. A moment where your nervous system exhales, where your identity isn't tethered to performance, where rest becomes ritual. Because real rest doesn't mean doing nothing, it means doing something that asks nothing of you. And in a world addicted to speed, that's an act of quiet defiance. Give yourself this hour, not as a reward, but as a baseline. Not when everything is finished, but because everything doesn't need to be. You are allowed to pause, to exist, to come home to yourself without needing to earn it. When life feels too heavy to lift, don't try to fix the whole thing. Just reach for one corner. Burnout often whispers, "You've failed. It's too late. Everything's too much." And in that moment, even the smallest task can feel impossible. But here's the truth. Burnout doesn't want you to remember you still have agency, not over everything, but over something. This is where the 5-minute reset begins. Choose one small act. Wipe down a surface, fold one shirt, open a window, delete 3 emails. You're not cleaning your life. You're reminding yourself that you can shift the energy in your space, that you are still capable of movement, even when everything feels stuck. It's not about achievement. It's about momentum. It's about proving to yourself gently that you're not powerless, just tired. That a dent is still a beginning. That one small act of care, no matter how quiet, is a declaration, "I'm still here. I still matter." And often, that's all it takes. Not to fix everything, but to interrupt the spiral. To catch yourself before the overwhelm becomes identity. To begin again, not with a plan, but with a pause, and the courage to take one small, sacred step. When life starts to feel like a spreadsheet, joy becomes a radical act. In burnout, we often stop doing things that don't have a clear outcome. No productivity, no purpose, no point. But here's the quiet truth most of us forget. Play isn't pointless. It's healing. That's why you need to schedule the delusion. Block out time for something delightfully unnecessary. Something your inner critic rolls its eyes at, and your inner child quietly longs for. Dance alone in your kitchen. Sketch castles you'll never build. Sing badly, loudly. Scroll through absurd property listings you'll never buy. Not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't. Burnout thrives in seriousness. But play interrupts the script. It reminds you that you are not here only to perform, produce, or prove. You're here to feel, to create, to enjoy. Joy is not a luxury. It's resistance. It's what softens your nervous system and rewires your sense of being. It's not an escape from life, it's a way back into it. So make space for the irrational. Protect your delight. Schedule the thing that makes no sense and makes you smile anyway. Because sometimes the most strategic thing you can do for your well-being is to let go and simply play. In the noise of modern connection, the endless group chats, likes, notifications, it's easy to mistake access for intimacy. But when burnout hits, when your inner world starts to unravel, you don't need 300 contacts. You need 3 lifelines, 3 people you can text without explanation, 3 voices that don't require a polished version of you. People who will pick up the phone when your words are shaky, who know the sound of your silence. These are not casual connections, they are emotional anchors. Because isolation doesn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it's being surrounded and still unseen. And when you're unraveling, it's not advice you need, it's presence. Someone who says, "I've got you," even when you can't find the words to ask. Burnout loves silence. Shame feeds on disconnection. But a single message, "Hey, I'm not okay," can interrupt the spiral. Can remind you that you don't have to hold everything by yourself. So choose your lifeline crew. Nurture those bonds like your peace depends on it, because often, it does. You were never meant to do this alone. And in the moments when you forget your own worth, let them hold it for you, gently, patiently, until you remember again. There's a quiet heaviness that builds when we move through the week without space to feel. We postpone grief, silence frustration, laugh off what actually hurt, until, without warning, the weight becomes too much and we break. Not because we're weak, but because we never stop to release. That's why the Sunday cry ritual exists. It's not about sadness, it's about permission. Permission to exhale, to unravel gently before life forces you to. To sit with the feelings you've been storing in the corners of your mind, the disappointment you brushed aside, the resentment you didn't name, the loneliness you buried under busyness. This ritual might look like tears. It might be journaling, music, a long walk where you don't try to be strong. Whatever form it takes, the intention is simple: feel, don't fix. Emotional release isn't indulgence, it's hygiene. Just like laundry or dishes, what's left unattended begins to rot. Not visibly, but quietly. In your tone, your tension, your disconnection from joy. So let Sunday be the container. A small, sacred window to clear the emotional static. To process what the week left behind. And to remind yourself, healing doesn't always require answers. Sometimes, it just asks that you stop pretending you're fine and let the softness in. There's a question that quietly haunts many of us, though we rarely say it aloud. Am I only valuable when I'm achieving? We chase goals. We pour ourselves into work. We try harder, not always because we're inspired, but because somewhere deep down, we're still trying to prove we're enough. That's the heart of burnout most people never name. It's not just physical or emotional exhaustion. It's existential exhaustion, the weight of constantly tying your worth to your output. And at some point, you begin to wonder if rest must be earned, if joy must be deserved, if love requires performance. This is where the existential reboot begins, with a question that interrupts the old script. What would I do differently if I believed I was already enough? Pause with that. Let it breathe. Because when your worth is no longer up for negotiation, your choices begin to shift. You stop over-explaining. You stop saying yes when your body says no. You stop trying to earn what was always yours to begin with: care, softness, belonging. You don't need to prove yourself through exhaustion. You don't need to reach rock bottom to rest. And the version of you who lives from self-worth, not self-proving, they're not a distant fantasy. They're already here, waiting for you to lay down the weight and return to who you were before the striving began. Burnout doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through forgetfulness, numbness, a vague ache that something's off but you can't name it. And when it lingers long enough, we start to believe it's just who we are now. But you are not your exhaustion. You're not broken. You're just carrying too much for too long without space to breathe. The lessons are simple, though not always easy to live. You don't need to earn rest. You don't have to optimize your healing. You don't have to wait until things fall apart to begin again. You've seen now that small shifts matter. One habit. One pause. One honest message to someone who gets it. These are not trivial. They're lifelines. So, what can you do today? Maybe it's 5 minutes of silence before the next task. Maybe it's deleting the app that drains you. Maybe it's saying no to something, or yes to something that makes no sense but makes you smile. Maybe it's letting yourself feel without needing to fix. This is how healing begins, not in grand gestures, but in gentle decisions made repeatedly. You don't need to change everything. Just start where you are, with what you have. And remember, you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to feel. And you are allowed to rebuild, slowly, imperfectly, and fully on your own terms. The life you're craving? It doesn't start with more. It starts with less noise and more truth.